So welcome, Devin. I'm glad that you're here and that we can learn more about you and your apostolate.
Yeah, thank you for having me with you. It's great.
So you got this idea when you were on a pilgrimage with your wife after a very difficult situation with your daughter who had just been born, and I found it so interesting. You were seeking to do something with God's will, with a ministry, and the I think it was the spiritual director on the pilgrimage asked you if you were married
Yeah, right.
and told you to go home and be like Joseph. I thought that was a powerful statement.
Yeah, it was at first it was not what I wanted to hear because when she said, so she was the translator for Father Yozo.
Mhm.
And so when she said go home and be Saint Joseph, all I could envision was a guy who holds lilies and all the stained glass windows makes him look like he's about 150 years old. He's
Yep.
bald and he has no virility. And so I thought, do I really want to go home and be Saint Joseph? But then, I entrusted my life to Our Blessed Lady. And it was almost like I felt like she was saying, let me introduce you to my spouse. Let me introduce you to Saint Joseph. And it was just amazing. For the next several years, it was like I was on download, just experiencing or receiving almost like revelation in a sense for me of who Saint Joseph was. And I ended up writing a book called Joseph's Way. It was a letter to myself about fatherhood through the lens of Saint Joseph by comparing him to the patriarchs. And so that was the beginning of all of it. Yeah. So it was because of a dire situation in our family, and a friend of mine took us across the world, and that's where I got the message: go home and be Saint Joseph.
And so how did the idea for the Fathers of St. Joseph start? And how did you form that? You
Okay. Yeah.
co-founded it.
Yeah. So basically, as I was writing about Saint Joseph, really what was going on was prior to this trip, my wife was pregnant with our third daughter, Anna Marie. And Anna Marie was born at 28 weeks premature. So she was very, very young and very tiny, very small. And she spent a month in the neonatal intensive care unit. And during that month, they engaged or got her digestive system and her lungs to facilitate. Everything was working great. And she came home. And within 5 days, she contracted RSV, which is a cold that attacks premature infants' lungs. So we took her back to the hospital. We admitted her to the regular pediatric unit because we couldn't take her back in the NICU. And the nurses were not equipped to take care of Anna Marie. They admitted it. They said, she's so small. We've never taken care of a baby this small before. Her leg was like the size of my index finger. She was so small. Well, due to nurse neglect, she suffered 10 hours of apnea, and not enough oxygen was transmitted to her brain. And then we had to medevac her out. They medevaced her out to a children's hospital about 2 hours away. And by the time she arrived, she suffered a hypoxic event, not enough, she basically clinical brain injury. And from that moment on, she was trapped inside of her body. We lost our Anna Marie, and as far as the Anna Marie that we knew. And during that time, I was trying to start a business. I was involved in ministry. I just had a conversion just a couple years before. And my wife said, I need you to come home and be a husband and be a father. And so when I began to write Joseph's Way as a letter to myself to try to figure out what does it mean to be a father, how do I actually live out this role in a way that is pleasing to God? Because I just saw fatherhood as a second-rate vocation. Very boring, very normal. It's not exciting. It's not like St. Paul, who's out there evangelizing the nations or being one of the apostles. And so I thought, why would somebody really want to do that? Even though I've signed up for it through marriage. And so in the process, I discovered that I wasn't the only guy who wrestled with the banality or the boredom, if you will, of fatherhood. What does it mean to be a father? Why is fatherhood so important? Is it great? Is it a path to glory? Can you become a saint by being a father? Because I think that's a big question for a lot of people once they get on the road to living out their Catholic faith and loving the Lord Jesus. They feel kind of like they shortchanged Jesus as men because we didn't become a priest or we didn't become a monk. And so the Lord was showing me through Joseph's Way that it is a call to greatness. It is a call to sanctity. And Saint Joseph, the two of the greatest saints ever were a mother and a wife and a husband and a father, Mary and Joseph. And so that gave me great hope. And so in this process, I discovered a lot of other men were suffering from the same kind of condition where they didn't know how to be a father, the importance of fatherhood, why it's necessary. And so we founded the Fathers of St. Joseph. And at first, I thought it was just going to be a group of 7 guys going through Joseph's way. But our first meeting, we had like 40 guys. And pretty soon we started having chapters all over the nation based on this content. And so I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to actually implement a systematic method to have chapters across the world. Actually, we have them in Australia, Canada, Austria, Ireland, you name it. But we're not huge or anything. It's just that we're just like St. Joseph. We're little, silent, hidden. We're humble, and we're trying to live out what I call St. Joseph's spirituality, his way of life.
Well, you've written many, many books and many programs on St. Joseph, and men have a lot to learn from you, especially in the face of the culture, which has really denigrated the role of fathers. It's been going on since the 1970s. If you look at, I just look at the programs I grew up with as a child, where the father was a central figure and had loving authority over the family, compared to today, where the father is often mocked and the woman is always the awesome ruler of the family. And it's a real difference. And I can imagine how men are feeling these days with all that's happened in the culture. You lay out some very interesting statistics in your book, The Day of Battle, which is a book that Devin will offer free to, it's a downloadable book that he's offering to anybody who joins our conference on May 1st. But I was reading through it, and you offer some really interesting statistics about the importance of men, especially in a Catholic or Christian family. You say, regarding the practice of the faith, when the mothers are regular churchgoers, but the dad is an irregular attendee, 3% of the children will become regular attendees, while 59% will be irregular and 38% will walk away from the faith completely. Then you say, when the father doesn't practice at all, but the mother is a regular attendee, 2% of the children will be regular attendees. So the numbers even drop. 37% irregular and 60% will be lost to the faith. That's quite a jump from even being a part-time attendee. Right. And then you say, when moms and dads both attend church regularly, 33% of the children will be regular attendees, 41% irregular, and 25% will not practice at all. That's quite a difference of spread, and it shows the importance of the father in the family and showing that spiritual leadership that is so necessary. And then there are additional statistics for children whose father is not involved with the family. The children will become more drawn to the secular culture, and they will be more involved in risky sexual behaviors, drugs and alcohol, and even there's a higher incidence of imprisonment. So we clearly have a crisis of fatherhood going on here, especially in our church. And when you bring St. Joseph into your life and into the family, how is that helping the fathers kind of retake their spiritual importance, their role in the family? How is this helping the men?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so there's a couple things you said there that I want to capitalize on, though. First is that there's a fantastic statistic by Baptist Press, I believe, or the Pew Research I can't remember which one, but it says if the mother is the first to convert to Christianity, there's a 17% chance that the family will follow. But if a father is the first to convert to Christianity, there's a 93% chance that the family will follow. That's a huge discrepancy. So that's from a very practical standpoint. And then you said something earlier about the denigration of men and the exaltation of women. And I think the big word is shame. I think men have been shamed for their masculinity. Men have been shamed for their patriarchy. Patriarchy is a swear word now, a curse word. We're shamed for actually being fathers, although the United States government now has this fatherhood initiative, but it's a soft fatherhood initiative, because to this point, to this question you're asking right now, what does it mean with these statistics and St. Joseph? What's the connection? And I think the connection is this. Though Mary was the most perfect human being, fully human being ever, and Jesus Christ was the perfect God-man. And both of them, it says that Mary was full of grace and Jesus is full of grace and truth, John 1:14. But yet God called Joseph to lead. This is so God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. God summons us as men to be spiritual leaders because that's the way he's grafted it into the divine plan. And we see this in Malachi chapter 4, verse 6. God warns the world. He says, before that great and terrible day, before I cast judgment on the earth, I will turn the hearts of fathers toward the hearts of children. So the hearts of children will turn their hearts to their fathers, but not only to their fathers, but to the heavenly Father, lest I come and strike the land with a curse. That's the whole point. And so God has built it in pragmatically that children look to their fathers as the authority, as the leader, as the priest of the family. That's the way it's supposed to be. And so that's what St. Joseph was in a way. Prior to the fall of the Israelites in the desert, where they rose up and committed revelry when Moses was up on the mountain and he brought down the 10 commandments and he saw that the Israelites were, committing debauchery. Up to that point, every father was the priest of his own family. Right. But then the Levites because that had to be removed from the people because the people were unfaithful. So the Levites who were faithful, they became the tribe who offered sacrifice on behalf of all of Israel. But as fathers, we're called to be the priest of our domestic church. And what does a priest do? A priest offers sacrifice. And what kind of sacrifice do we offer? We offer the sacrifice of ourselves. And so this is a key. When a father leads by serving and serves by leading, or he leads by loving and he loves by leading, that's when a family begins to change. And when he becomes that link as that priest of his domestic church between the church of God and God and his children, that's when things really begin to change. This does not denigrate women. In fact, if men are, I guess the way, when we teach women to be men, we do it as a service to women because we teach men to be feminized, so then men won't uphold the dignity of women. Mm-hmm. And so the key is women, if you look at the creation account, woman, St. Thomas says this, St. Thomas Aquinas says, what's first in God's intention is last in creation. And so Mary was the last, as Eve was the last. Woman is the pinnacle, okay? And so what's man's job? Man's job is to protect and uphold and respect that pinnacle, but it doesn't mean just throwing her out to the wolves. We're in a sense called to be the protector. Mm-hmm. We're called to protect woman in the garden and the domestic church. So that's what St. Joseph embodies. He's the protector. He's the provider. He's the priest of his family.
And I want to get back to that quote by Aquinas because it comes back later in the Fatima message. But I want to mention too, you brought up a quote that Jesus himself said in Mark. Let me look for it here. Mark chapter 3, verse 27. No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first bind the strong man. That's a real powerful visual of what's happened in our culture. It happened even in the Garden of Eden.
Absolutely.
Satan bound Adam, so he wasn't there to protect Eve. It's playing out through all of human history. And now we see how men are being bound, even to the point where they can barely speak about certain things and they're going to be canceled. So
Satan
has truly bound the strong man in the family. So he's plundering the women and the children. And if we look at it in that way, we would want to welcome back God's design for marriage and family and the male and the female and the roles. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think that the evil one, you're exactly right. Jesus in Mark, he talks about how the devil wants to bind the strong man in order to plunder his house. But how does he bind the strong man? It's not only just the government or transgenderism or Black Lives Matter and Antifa, which by all of them, they're anti-fatherhood. If you just get on their website, there's no mention of fatherhood or there's no mention of the nuclear family. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's a redefinition of the family. And we have to understand that this is a big deal because God created the family this is very important. God created the family to be a symbol, a reflection, a living reflection of the Trinity. And so every family who's pursuing good and every family who's pursuing God is a living reminder to this world of God and his goodness, because God is three distinct persons who are so self-giving that they're eternally one in essence. And from that unity, there's life and love and bliss and rapture and creativity and power that never ends. And so God creates a man and a woman, distinct persons like the Trinity, Father and Son, Holy Spirit, distinct persons, but they're called together in unity. And from that unity, there's life and love. That's what a marriage and family is supposed to do. It's supposed to clue in the world to the Trinity, to our destiny. Our identity leads to our destiny. The devil hates that.
Mhm.
And so he wants to attack the family. And the way to attack the family is by removing the father,
Mhm.
because as all those stats that we just talked about prove. So he's got to get the father out, then he can plunder the wife and the children and have his way with them. And so how does he do this? At a very practical level, he binds us with 4 tactics. It's temptation, intimidation, distraction, and isolation. And so the way the devil works is he wants to tempt us in sin. And if he can't get a man to fall into temptation where he's committing mortal sin and he's destroying his relationship with God, then he'll try to intimidate him. You know what? Don't pray with your family. It's too freaky. Don't seek God first, because that's just, it's just weird. Don't pray in public. Don't teach your children to seek first the kingdom of God, because they got to seek sports first, and having a great career. And so he intimidates us. And then sometimes he puts the pressure on us so that, like in our work, in our job, don't express your faith because you'll lose your job. You'll lose that promotion. And if he can't get us with intimidation, because that's the tactic he used with Adam, he intimidated Adam. And then Eve tempted Adam. And almost always not always, but a lot of time, temptation will come through the manipulation of woman. And we see that in pornography. Men who are using pornography are powerless in their homes. They're powerless as priests of their family. They have no ability to lead because they're owned by Satan. And so this is very important. When we're owned by temptation, we're owned by Satan. When we're owned by, or we're defeated by intimidation, we're owned by Satan. And the distraction, we have hobbies, we have our work, we have our FaceTime on our phones, and all these things that we got going on, sports and television. And we forget that our first noble calling is our vocation, because that word vocation is derived from the Latin word vox, which means voice. It's in our vocation that we hear the voice of God calling us to glory. And so if, one spiritual director said to me, you will become a saint by means of your vocation, not outside of it. And I dare say, if we who've signed up to be husbands and fathers think that we're going to become saints or become glorified or become holy by some other means, we're gravely mistaken. This is where we need to spend our energies. And so the devil is trying to remove us with distraction. But then if he can't get us with those 3 tactics, he will use isolation. This is a sin of the Pharisees. This is when we begin to have an awesome relationship with God. We go deep with him, and then we begin to see ourselves as better than others. We don't remember the dirt we came from. We don't remember that we're sinners. And in that process, we say it's them, the tax collectors, and it's us, the Pharisees, the great ones. And when we do that, we isolate ourselves from actually being able to bring Christ's light into the gates of hell, to barge down those gates of hell and to bring the light of Christ into the darkness of people's souls. And so we can never think that we're better than anyone else. But so this is the key. The devil wants to bind us in pornography, in greed, in pursuit of popularity and prestige and honor and all the things that the world temporarily offers that are very fleeting, especially worldly significance. And if we buy into worldly significance, which waxes and wanes, it flickers and fades. People might like me today, but then they hate me tomorrow, which means that I need to change my image. I need to change who I am, which is stupid because God created me to be a revelation of his glory. So the key here is that we must not allow ourselves to be bound by Satan, because our family and our future generations and the church is at stake. Because as society goes, as the way the family goes, so goes society. But before that, as the family goes, so goes the church. That's very important.
Well, and you talk about the pressures on men too. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, especially since the 80s when materialism has really taken over in our country. There's this pressure to succeed at all costs. And
Yeah.
and I really appreciate your defining for men and just the things that they are tempted with, because I think a lot of married couples can see this happening in their family, and the culture itself, the forces of the culture are pushing us. And I have to remind our viewers, when we're talking about different groups that have come to the forefront, and especially in this last year, we're dealing with a spiritual battle here. And a lot of it is we've contributed to it by our own sin, our own walking away from God and accepting things of the culture. There's a great priest that many people know, Father Richard Heilman. I remember when I interviewed him about 10 years ago, he said it best. He said, we have become comfortable with the evil in our midst.
Mm.
We're comfortable with abortion. We're comfortable with the things that are pushing against our families and pulling us away from a Christian way of living. And I want to get back to the famous St. Thomas Aquinas message that you had. What comes last in the order of execution is first in the order of intention. Mm-hmm. That was one of St. Thomas Aquinas's principles. And you applied that to the Fatima message. And so I'd ask you to talk about when St. Joseph appeared in that October 13th apparition, the last apparition at Fatima. He's the last to appear, but he's the first in what God maybe has intended for him as we move forward. Yeah, talk a little bit about Fatima, St. Joseph, maybe where we're heading with that.
Yeah, so Fatima is amazing in just its breadth, its depth, the way that it's swept the world for so many decades, even a century. And Our Lady is amazing in those apparitions and what she's revealed. But one of the things I think that has been somewhat eclipsed in the apparitions is this idea of Joseph. You know, you watch movies on Our Lady of Fatima, and there's no mention of Saint Joseph. Right. There's no mention of the vision of Saint Joseph anywhere. He's still hidden, you know, just like he was when he was on earth.
Even in the latest Fatima movie.
Yeah, where's Joseph? You know, he's hidden, he's secret. But this is the point. You're right. What St. Thomas says is what's first in God's intention is last in execution. So it's very interesting in the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima. I think it's like the second or third apparition. Mary says to Lucia and the other visionaries, she says, Joseph is coming. Mm-hmm. Joseph will come in the sixth apparition in October, and October 13th. Now, if I'm one of the, children of Fatima, I would be like, well, Mary, you are the queen. You are the mother. I mean, St. Joseph is great, but what's the big deal? You're everything. And yet Mary is directing us to St. Joseph. And so when it comes to this sixth apparition, Mary promises two things. Joseph is coming, and I'm going to perform a miracle, a sign. Now, on that day, there are basically like torrential rains. 70,000 pilgrims flood the Cova de Iria amidst this rainfall, muddy fields, people waiting for this sign. And it's very interesting because as the visionaries are seeing Our Lady, she disappears. And then they see St. Joseph and the child Jesus. At the same time, the pilgrims witness the sun begin to zig and zag and dart and descend upon them. And it is so alarming that people begin to confess their sins. I mean, yell their sins aloud, saying, we're going to die. And I mean, can you imagine surviving that and have to ride home with your wife? I mean, but so the sun is plummeting upon them. And then St. Joseph and the child Jesus bless the world. And then at that moment, the sun returns to its proper place in the sky. What's the message? What's Our Lady trying to say? And then right after that, the visionaries see Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, the Holy Family. Okay, so what's going on? Mary, I believe, is saying this is one of the key secrets to Fatima. St. Joseph, what was first in God's intention is last in his execution. The last apparition, the sixth apparition here, Joseph is on the scene with the child Jesus. Why? Because when the world turns to the example of St. Joseph and his spiritual fatherhood, then he and Jesus, fatherhood, can bless the world. When we fathers, we turn our gaze, our affection towards St. Joseph, when we learn from his example, we can begin to bless our family with the blessing of Jesus. And it's very interesting that they become a family, or they show themselves as a family, the Holy Family, directly after that. What's the message? Mary is saying that fatherhood in the image of St. Joseph is key to avoiding disaster for the world, nuclear disaster, war, havoc, whatever it is. St. Joseph is the key. If men begin to live and embody St. Joseph's spirituality, which I believe has 4 pillars, if they begin to live this spirituality, then their family will be blessed and become a holy family. And it's the family that changes the church. And because the church is the larger family of God, comprised of the micro domestic church of the family. You get the family right, you get the church right. You get the church right, you begin to get the world right. But see, this is what's happened is the world has really influenced the church. And many of our church leaders, may God bless them, but unfortunately, so many of them became hirelings over the decades.
Right.
And because of that, we did not get a proper vision of spiritual leadership, of masculinity, of fatherhood. In fact, we were preached the nice guy gospel. Just lay down and roll over and play dead, and and just don't be a man because that's offensive. But what is a man? A man is sacrificing like Saint Joseph for his family, fleeing from Herod, who's a symbol of Satan, who wants to devour the child. This is the key for our culture.
And so I want to ask you to please explain a little bit more about the Fathers of St. Joseph and what men are gaining from this apostolate.
Right. So the Fathers of St. Joseph is an apostolate whose aim is for the restoration, redemption, and revitalization of fatherhood through the lens or through the living of the spirituality of St. Joseph. And so St. Joseph, I believe, has 4 fundamental pillars that made him the greatest father ever, that made him one of the most powerful saints, second to our Blessed Lady. And that is, he embraced silence in himself, silence before men. He didn't worry about what people thought. He wasn't living for worldly significance. And then silence before God. He gave his life completely to God in secret. So he embraced silence. He embraced woman. He embraced Mary. He embraced her totality and all that came with Mary, her vow to God, her virginity. He embraced that for himself. The Immaculate Conception and all the struggles with that. So he embraced woman, and he defeated, in a sense, lust in the heart. And he never objectified Mary. And so by that, so we have to, in a sense, part of embracing woman is embracing our wives, bearing their burden as our own, defeating lust in the heart, but also consecrating our lives or surrendering our lives to the Blessed Mother so that she can consecrate us, and you, St. Joseph, to God as they did for Jesus in the temple. And then we need to embrace the child. And that means we need to become the face of the Father that our children cannot see to them. We need to become the voice of the Father that our children cannot hear to them. We need to be the touch of the Father that our children cannot see. We need to be that priest. We need to be Christ in our home to our wives and our children. And that's the last pillar, which is embrace your charitable authority. We got to lead. We have to be priests. We need to be leading prayer in our home. We need to be leading sacrifice in our home. And it's just like in dancing. In dancing, the man leads. He takes the first step. Does it mean he's a better dancer? No. But he must take the first step. And this is what in St. Joseph, we see that he sets the pace of self-giving love. That's what, in essence, a man reflects in his body. He's called to go forth from himself and set the pace of self-giving love. It doesn't mean he's holier or he prays better or anything like that. It just means that that's his duty, his role, his responsibility is to set the pace of self-giving love for his family so they can follow that pace. And then pretty soon, when he's giving, then the wife and the children are giving. And then there's this union of love that reflects the Trinity. And that's what we're all about, is to empower men with this spirituality. We have many different resources that lay out this plan, but allow guys to really be able to embody St. Joseph's spirituality so that that miracle of Fatima, in the end, my immaculate heart will triumph, Mary says. How? When fathers look to St. Joseph and their families become like mine, Mary is saying, holy families.
I think it's very significant and providential that Pope Francis declared a year of St. Joseph this year. We felt inspired to do it a couple of weeks before he did. And so we're really happy to be finally bringing St. Joseph forward in the Fatima message. We actually had an icon commissioned that shows St. Joseph and Patrick will put it up on the screen, but it's a St. Joseph in a leadership role in the family, and Mary presenting him to the world as she did at Fatima. And so that's our image for this year. Devin, we're really happy to have you on this podcast. I hope we did not steal from your talk. You're speaking twice, so you'll be speaking April 10th again on our bluearmy.com/year of St. Joseph, premiering at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And again, on May 1st, our conference, which you have to register for, and that will be at reclaimingthefamily.com. And then Devin has a great book he wants to share called The Day of Battle. I've been reading it. It's a wonderful book, and it'll help you understand the significance of the 13th day in Scripture and in the Fatima message. So we're really pleased to have had you join us today on Fatima Presents. And we look
Thank you.
forward to seeing more of you as this year unfolds and more of your work with fathers, and that more and more groups can form. So again, visit his website at fathersofstjoseph.org.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you
All
again.
right. Thank you.
Thanks.